with friends and loved ones, with each heart, each life. Thank you that you care about our needs, our joys. We thank you for this opportunity of sitting here and listening to your word. We pray a special blessing on Brother Jason as he opens your word and as he teaches us. Lord, we know in the Sunday school class this morning, in one of the children's classes, we know that they're going to be taking a note on 4 things that he's going to teach this morning. And Lord, I pray that you'd bless him as he teaches. We pray for each one gathered across the world in your house, worshiping your name today. Pray that your name would be honored and glorified. In Jesus' name, amen. You may be seated. Bless you, brother.
Good morning. Welcome each one here in Jesus' name this morning. I would invite you to open your Bibles to Genesis 13 this morning. There's a couple, we'll probably be reading in a couple of different chapters there. In Luke 17:32 is a very simple verse, and it simply says, remember Lot's wife. So what do you know about Lot's wife? Does anybody know anything about Lot's wife? Raymond.
Well, when angels came and they told Lot to get out of there, they told him to not look back. And his wife looked back and she became a pillar of salt.
Ooh, okay. That's true. That's true. Lot's wife became a pillar of salt. I guess she quite literally stopped dead in her tracks, right? So, remember Lot's wife. And in the context of Luke 17 there, it talks about when the tribulations will come, when the troubles will come, don't run back inside and get this, and don't go back and do that. In other words, just lay it down and run. Okay? Lay it down and run. Do we have trouble in our life laying things down and running the race? Do we have trouble with that? I do. There's so many things that can distract me, and there's so many things that, that compete for attention, you could say. And that's one aspect of it. The other aspect is that sometimes the world has my sympathies. And so when there's things happening over here, I want to turn and look. And I have an interest in what's happening and all that. I don't know how deep we'll get into this. Lot is actually a character, too, that is one that I'd like to look at. And Lot is a man who achieved a degree of fame because of his association with his uncle Abraham. The title of the message today is just Mr. Lot and Mrs. Lot. It's a pretty basic title, but Mr. and Mrs. Lot. Mr. Lot and Mrs. Lot. So, there was a town, it was called Ur of the Chaldees. It was a fairly advanced town. And there was a family living there, Terah, old man Terah. And he had a son. He had 3 sons, Nahor, Haran, and Abram. And one of them, I think it was Nahor, who was Lot's dad, he died there in that town, in Ur of the Chaldees. He died there. But Terah, God spoke to Abram or Terah, and Terah left Ur of the Chaldees, and they made a migration from that advanced wicked town. I mean, culturally it was advanced, and they had their own civilization, they had their language, they had education, but they were fairly wicked. And so they moved, Terah and his 2 boys, and then Abram took Lot with him as well. Or Terah took Lot, his grandson, with him, out of Ur, and moved to a place called Haran. And I don't know what Haran was like, but it was a better place than Ur. It was probably, there was less wickedness there. But it was somewhat of a stopping place. God had bigger things in mind for Abram and his family. But Terah they moved from Ur to Haran. And Lot was from Ur. I don't know I assume Lot was married, because I think Lot and Abram were not too far apart in age. They might have been a little bit, but I don't think they were just terrible far apart, but they may have been. But Mrs. Lot, I don't know where they got married. They either got married in Haran or they got married in Ur. Some of the sources I had looked up, which were somewhat suspect anyway, says that Mrs. Lot came from Ur. So if she came from Ur, she was well acquainted with this urban setting, with the cultural arrangements and the cultural civilization that came from being a part of this environment. And can you imagine in your own mind, I don't think, back then the women didn't have any say, very little say in what they did. And so Father Terah decides it's time to move, and so his son and his grandson and their wives and all of them, they just move along too. Well, my imagination starts running, and I'm thinking that Mrs. Lot isn't really totally on board with this, leaving the civilization and moving off into the country. But she went, and she was along. The Bible doesn't say anything about that. The Bible doesn't say anything other than that she was Lot's wife. Well, fast forward many years, and Abram is called to move out of Haran. God came to Abram and said, "Go to a land that I'll show you." So Abram, he packs his things, and they go. And they just go. I don't know how they decide where to go, but they just followed the road. And Mrs. Lot, and Abram's wife, and all their servants, and it says the souls they had gotten in Haran. I don't know their children, whatever. They packed the whole thing and moved out of Haran and moved on down the road. And they went down to Canaan. There was a famine in Canaan, so they went to Egypt, and Abram lied about his wife, and anyway, had a whole rigmarole there, and collected a bunch of money and left out of Egypt and came back to, collected money and lost friends and ended up back in Canaan. And now they have all this stuff. And in Genesis 13, we're going to break in here, and Abram and Lot separate. So there's going to be some reading today, and I'm just going to do it. I'm not going to apologize for it. But Genesis 13:1 through 13 says, "And Abram went up out of Egypt, he and his wife, and all that he had, and Lot with him into the south. And Abram was very rich in cattle, in silver, and in gold." It doesn't say that before he went to Egypt, but after he was in Egypt, he was very rich. "And he went on his journeys from the south, even to Bethel, unto the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Hai, unto the place of the altar, which he had made there at the first. And there Abram called on the name of the Lord. And Lot also, which went with Abram, had flocks and herds and tents. And the land was not able to bear them. that they might dwell together, for their substance was great, so that they could not dwell together. And there was a strife between the herdmen of Abram's cattle and the herdmen of Lot's cattle, and the Canaanite and the Perizzite dwelled then in the land. And Abram said unto Lot, Let there be no strife, I pray thee, between me and thee, and between my herdmen and thy herdmen, for we be brethren. Is not the whole land before thee? Separate thyself, I pray thee, from me. If thou wilt take the left hand, then I will go to the right, and if thou depart to the right hand, then I will go to the left. And Lot lifted up his eyes, and beheld all the plain of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere, before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. Even as the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, as thou comest unto Zoar. Then Lot chose him all the plain of Jordan. And Lot journeyed east, and they separated themselves, the one from the other. Abram dwelled in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelled in the cities of the plain, and pitched his tent toward Sodom. But the men of Sodom were wicked and sinners before the Lord exceedingly. So Lot was a man who had an eye for business. You know, Uncle Abram, he had a lot. He was very rich, and Lot had herds and flocks and tents. But someday, you know, Lot, he wanted to be rich too. And here's this opportunity that was just too good to pass up. I mean, he gets to pick whatever land he wants to go to. So he picked the land, the good land for pasture. And Lot, I don't know if Lot had any sons. It doesn't say. It says he has son-in-laws. So I assume Lot had a family of girls. And maybe Lot thought that was a disadvantage to him. I don't know. But he definitely decided to get down here to these cities. There's 4 cities down here, I think, or 4 cities. And he had a good market for his things, and he had lots of pasture, and his wife will be happy because there'll be education and people, and yeah, it's going to be a good time. So, anyway, they went down there, and they pitched their tent toward Sodom. It says they dwelled in the cities of the plain, and they pitched his tent toward Sodom, which I take to mean that out of the 4 cities, he picked Sodom as his town to live in. So there was different things happened. They lived there. Life was good. And somewhere in there, let's see. So yeah, Lot, he had learned, one of the things about Lot was that he was considered a righteous man. And I already alluded to it, that he left Ur with his grandpa and uncles, and he moved to Haran. He lived in Haran there for a long time, went to Egypt, and he was with Abram all this time, but he had learned righteousness from an early age. He learned about God, and he learned righteousness, and he had a relationship with God. But you know, Lot liked his money too, just like all of us do. He did, but Lot had a problem with I'm going to call it 2 masters. You know, he liked his money and he liked his God, and he was trying to work the 2 together. And it caused him to be a little selfish, maybe, in his choice that he had. But Abram was the peacemaker here, and Abram could be the one that I'm not sure if Abram was the peacemaker because he was the older one, or if he was the peacemaker because he loved peace more than Lot. I don't know that. But Abram proposed the separation. He said it's just not going to work for both of us to be together. The pastures are bare. There's not enough grass here. There's not enough water. There's too many people and too many animals in one pile, and we've got to move. So he said, we're brethren. You know, both of us are righteous men. We both fear God. He said, why don't you pick a place you can go, and you take your family and you make a new start. So they're both righteous, but the one thing is selfishness taints the righteous. Did you know that? Selfishness taints the righteous. We can be ever so humble and ever so sincere and have a desire, but if some of our decisions are chosen through selfishness, then it taints those decisions, right? It taints some of them so that our decisions subconsciously move in a negative direction. And that's kind of what happened with Lot. You know, with this selfish, I call it selfish. I mean, Abraham had given him the choice, but the Bible points out in different details there that would indicate him choosing after a selfish way. So Lot maybe subconsciously took the place that gave him the most personal gain, but his family suffered the consequences in years later. Lot was not necessarily intentionally looking out for the welfare of his family. And so in that respect, selfishness tainted his decision because he looked out for the short-term benefit of himself without intentionally making a long-term decision. We could be one way. The abundant water and the prime markets, and it was a great place for his new business headquarters. So anyway, Lot moved down there. Mr. and Mrs. Lot, they packed their children and their belongings and their animals, and they signed the paperwork to dissolve the partnership, and they left. And they came down to Sodom. It says, and so they got a house there in Sodom, and it says that Lot sat in the gate. And I'm not sure what all that means, but Lot became a man with some reputation. So he was a sort of respected man there. We could say he had his office in town there, and people could come and they did business with him. So Lot, he's a respected man there. His wife is happy here. And they live. His daughters find husbands there. He had some sons-in-law. His business does well. And Lot, the wicked lifestyle of this town, though, vexes or frustrates him. He does not like it. He does not like it. And his children are acclimating into this society. And Lot is here. Lot would tell you he's in a bad situation. This is not where he really wants to be, but this is where he finds himself. And sometimes we find ourselves that way too. That two-master dilemma that Jesus talks about, that you cannot serve God and mammon, is something that we fight too. Or at least I do. Some of our decisions that we make and some of the way we prioritize our time, there is a very real need to put food on the table. And there is it's necessary. We have to pay the bills, and we have to be responsible with what we have, and that's good. And yet sometimes, I guess, we allow that drive. I'm not sure where the line is, but sometimes that drive turns into more than a necessity, and it turns into a force that actually makes decisions or influences our decision-making process. And instead of being intentional about our decisions, we end up making decisions based on a reaction of the circumstances that we face, which is not all bad, but one unintended or one consequence of that is that some of these decisions we can end up drifting along and find ourselves in a situation that we would not have chosen to go. And Lot found himself here. Because of these decisions that Lot made, they ended up in the middle of Sodom in a terrible lifestyle. His soul was vexed, his righteous soul was vexed, and yet he wasn't willing to move. So one of the things is the two-master dilemma causes chaos. And it causes chaos in our life, or it does in my life. And I think it's especially bad for someone who has their own business, and the pressures of life, especially when this business takes off, and it just rolls, and there's people calling, and the phone doesn't quit ringing, and there's new business coming in, and there's snakes that pop up, and you've got to work with this, and then you've got maybe your family is needing your time, and you're feeling guilty for not, you just don't reach around, and yeah, so I can identify with that thought very well, or that thing. It's sometimes our life, we just have to be intentional and make some decisions sometimes that are not, maybe not don't make sense on paper. But sometimes we just have to make intentional decisions about life to keep from making some of these involuntary decisions. What do we do with life's opportunities to change? Sometimes God sends opportunities along. You ever notice that maybe in the middle of something you have something pops up that looks terrible? It looks absolutely terrible. And you just don't have the strength to deal with it. You can't deal with it, and it's maybe bankrupts you, or maybe does something. I don't know. Do you ever think that God sends opportunities disguised as problems? Maybe opportunities to change. Maybe He's knocking on the door and saying, you know what? You should maybe go this direction. Well, Mr. Lot had this happen to him, and Mrs. Lot both. So here they are in the middle of Sodom, and they are right there. Things are going well for them, and their children are doing well in school. They're growing up, but then war breaks out. War breaks out, and they all get rounded up and hauled off into a camp. They're all in a camp. And the enemy comes in and takes their stuff away, and all their money and jewels and possessions, all the good stuff the enemy comes and gets. And they're herded out. So Lot and his family are taken captive. It's a time of terror for them, uncertainty. The markets, there's no business happening. The markets are disrupted, and it's really an opportunity for Lot to focus on what's really important. And then out of the blue, here comes Uncle Abraham and saves him, actually rescues them, gets all their stuff back, and now they can all go home and make a new start. Lot had an opportunity here to actually change direction. But Lot, as far as we know, Lot just went back to his place, and Lot started right in where he left off. He goes back to his office in town, where he meets people coming in, and whatever he does, transacts his business there. But Lot, that's where Lot is. And his wife is doing whatever she did there. His daughters and their son-in-laws were doing their thing. Eating and drinking and making merry and having a good time. The danger is past, thanks to Uncle Abraham. He took care of us here. I don't know what would have happened to Lot without Uncle Abraham. Do you ever think about that? Uncle Abraham took him under his wing, moved him around. Abraham prevented him from, all the servants from killing each other. Abraham rescued Lot when he was caught in this war. But Lot just goes right back in there. Mr. Lot and his wife both. I don't know if it vexed his wife's righteous soul. It doesn't say that. It just says it vexed Lot's righteous soul. Another point here, though, in the life of Lot, just looking at it, we have the benefit of looking at it from the big picture here. And Abraham helped him out, but interceding on others' behalf can make a difference in their life. Have you prayed for somebody? Has God laid somebody on your mind to pray for them? Maybe there's not a specific need that you know of for that person, that you know of. But God lays them on your heart. Do we take that opportunity and pray? When God rescued him, I'll finish the thought here about the intercession here. Abraham, in Genesis 18, the men had come to Abraham, and Abraham had entreated them. Well, when they found out that it was God and that they were going to go on their way to see what Sodom is like and destroy it, Abraham knew good and well what Sodom was like, and he knew good and well what God would find there. Well, I say good and well. He had a general idea. And Abraham said, but God, if you find 50 righteous people, will you spare the city? Yes, God says, I'll spare the city. But if you find, well, Abraham got to thinking, Lot's a bad place. Maybe there's not 50, so he backs it down to 45. No, God won't do it for 45. And then Abraham keeps thinking, and well, maybe Sodom is worse than he thinks. And so he backs it all the way down to 10 people. If there's 10 people, surely there's got to be 10 people in a city that big. 10 people. I won't bother you anymore, God. If for 10 people, would you save the city? And God says, yes, I'll save the city for 10 people. So Abraham, he feels sure that he has done what he could to save Lot and his people and the righteous people that are there. And God couldn't find 10 people. He could not find 10 righteous people. Sodom was so far gone that there was not 10 righteous people. Maybe one righteous person and his family. And even that was, even the whole family was iffy. But God in his mercy saved them. And I feel it's because of Abraham's intercession there. Abraham had a real concern for his nephew, even though the nephew was not living like Abraham wished he would be. He still had a concern for him. So one thing, though, that Lot learned from Abraham was hospitality. Did you know that? If you read Genesis 18 and you see the hospitality that Abraham expounded or gave to the men that came, and then the hospitality that Lot gave, it's interesting. It's very similar. And maybe it was a culture thing, maybe it wasn't. But the Bible makes note of it, and if the Bible makes note of it, then there's a reason for making note of something like that. But Lot was hospitable. The Sodomites were not, the people of Sodom were not so one of the things they were known for was their cruelty. They were not very hospitable. If a stranger came to their place, they more than likely would hurt him just for fun. They were really twisted. So Genesis 19, we'll just read this one here. And this is about, it gives an overview of Sodom and it gives an overview of Lot and then the people that come. And there came 2 angels to Sodom at even, and Lot sat in the gate of Sodom, and Lot, seeing them, rose up to meet them. And he bowed himself with his face toward the ground, and he said, Behold now, my lords, turn in, I pray you, into your servant's house, and tarry all night, and wash your feet. You shall rise up early, and go on your ways. And they said, Nay, we'll abide in the street all night. And he pressed upon them greatly, and they turned unto him, and entered into his house, and he made them a feast, and did bake unleavened bread, and they did eat. But before they lay down, the men of the city, even the men of Sodom, compassed the house round, both old and young, all the people from every quarter. And they called unto Lot, and said unto him, Where are the men which came into thee this night? Bring them out unto us, that we may know them. And Lot went out at the door unto them, and shut the door after him, and said, I pray you, brethren, do not so wickedly. Behold now, I have 2 daughters which have not known man. Let me, I pray you, bring them out unto you, and do ye to them as is good in your eyes. Only unto these men do nothing, for therefore came they under the shadow of my roof. And they said, Stand back! And they said again, This one fellow came in to sojourn, and he will needs be a judge. Now will we deal worse with thee than with them. And they pressed sore upon the man, even Lot, and came near to break the door. But the men put forth their hand, and pulled Lot into the house to them, and shut to the door. And they smote the men that were at the door of the house with blindness, both small and great, so that they wearied themselves to find the door. And the men said unto Lot, Hast thou here any besides son-in-law, and thy sons, and thy daughters, and whatsoever thou hast in the cities? Bring them out of this place, for we will destroy this place, because the cry of them is waxed great before the face of the Lord, and the Lord hath sent us to destroy it. And Lot went out and spake unto his sons-in-law, which married his daughters, and said, Up, get you out of this place, for the Lord will destroy this city. But he seemed as one that mocked unto his sons-in-law. And when the morning arose, then the angels hastened Lot, saying, Arise, take your wife and thy 2 daughters which are here, lest thou be consumed in the iniquity of the city. And while he lingered, the men laid hold upon his hand, and upon the hand of his wife, and upon the hand of his 2 daughters, the Lord being merciful unto him. And they brought him forth, and set him without the city. And it came to pass, when they had brought them forth abroad, that he said, Escape for thy life. Look not behind thee, neither stay thou in all the plain. Escape to the mountain, lest thou be consumed. And Lot said unto them, Oh, not so, my lord. Behold now, thy servant hath found grace in thy sight, and thou hast magnified thy mercy, which thou hast showed unto me in saving my life. And I cannot escape to the mountain, lest some evil take me, and I die. Behold now, this city is near to flee unto, and it is a little one. Oh, let me escape thither. Is it not a little one? And my soul shall live. And he said unto him, See, I have accepted thee concerning this thing also, that I will not overthrow this city, for the which thou hast spoken. Haste thee, escape thither, for I cannot do anything till thou be come thither. Therefore the name of the city was called Zoar. The sun was risen upon the earth. So this all happened in the nighttime, or in the very early morning. But the sun was risen upon the earth when Lot entered into Zoar. And then the Lord rained upon Sodom and upon Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven. And he overthrew those cities, and all the plain, and all the inhabitants of the cities, and that which grew upon the ground. So all the crops and the well-watered stuff all disappeared. But his wife looked back from behind him, and she became a pillar of salt. And Abraham got up early in the morning to the place where he stood before the Lord. And he looked toward Sodom and Gomorrah, and toward all the land of the plain, and behold, lo, the smoke of the country went up as the smoke of a furnace. And it came to pass, when God destroyed the cities of the plain, that God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow, when he overthrew the cities in the which Lot dwelt. You know what? I don't know what Abraham thought. Here he had pleaded with God all the way down to 10 people. Surely there's 10 people. And when Abraham got up and he saw this whole smoking ruin of what used to be these towns, he was, in his mind, he probably thought, oh no, what happened to Lot? And his first thought was, not even 10 righteous people. Not even 10 righteous people. And Lot lived down there. Can you just imagine that what Abraham thought? But anyway, Lot was in this town, this little town. He had left. But when Abraham interceded for Lot, he didn't realize, but he actually saved Lot's life. He saved Lot's life. One of the things that also helped Lot was his hospitality. One thing that's interesting about the New Testament is that it's so connected to the Old Testament. But in Hebrews 13:2, when it says, "Be not forgetful to entertain strangers, because some have entertained angels unawares," I think it's talking about this particular spot. The time when Abraham entertained his guests and Lot entertained his guests. Lot had no idea that these were angels coming here. He was just out of the generosity of his heart, he was entertaining these people. And it saved his life, even though he had to argue with them about where to go afterwards. But another thing that was interesting, he baked unleavened bread. Was unleavened bread the best thing he could give to these people? I don't think so. I think unleavened bread was a symbol of purity. Leaven is a symbol of sin. And Lot gave unleavened bread to these people. And I think it was a signal or a sign to them that his heart is clean. He is not perverted like the other people, or I don't know. Whatever it was a sign. It's also a thing that is a detail that's given, that he baked unleavened bread and gave it to them. Lot also risked his safety to protect his guests. Would you risk your safety to protect a stranger that comes in? Not necessarily, but when Lot went out there with those people, they were going to throw him away and do whatever they wanted to do. Another thing that Lot did, he became a fool to his family. When the men said, "Go get your other children," so Lot had to go running through town and get his other children, and he's talking to them and saying, "Hey, the Lord's going to destroy the city." His sons-in-law just thought, well, dear old Dad's caught up with his conspiracy theories again. Wouldn't he be happier if he just forgot about that and lived life like the rest of us? But Lot was willing to he believed these men he believed the men that they were sent from God and that the city was going to be on fire, and he was willing to put himself out and be a fool for God. So of course his sons-in-law, they laughed only for about a few hours, but they didn't laugh very much when the fire started coming down. So Lot, he was a righteous man that made some wrong choices. Some of these choices were not really even intentional choices. He found himself, because of his selfishness that tainted his decision-making process, it put him in a situation that caused him to make another choice, that caused him to make another choice, that caused him to make other choices. And his family became swallowed up in this city. The missus already said she was possibly not totally convinced it was a great idea to follow Grandpa Tira into the boondocks here, but she was happy in Sodom. You know, that was a cultural place for her. She was happy there. She had her daughters and her son-in-laws there, and she was happy there. There was entertainment, there was things to do, and she was just happy. For her, my imagination here, but it was a return to civilization and a throwback, or to the good old days, or to access to civilization. And leaving Sodom was incredibly hard for her, and it was hard for Lot too. They were used to this place. It was when they told him to get out now, you have to leave now. They lingered, and the angels actually had to grab a hold of him and take him outside the city. They had a real house there instead of the mobile tents that they lived in for so many years. And all her dreams were there. She was content. And because of this contentment, her faith, if it existed, was very weak. And because her faith was weak, there was no benefit to obeying there was no urgency and no benefit to obeying what was laid out there for them. And she left the city because she was compelled to, but her heart was still there. And for her, the command to not look back was interpreted as a strong suggestion. So, as they hurried along toward this town, it says that she was behind. So I can imagine she lagged behind. She didn't have the urgency, or she didn't put the same stock in the message that Lot did. And so they're going along, and she's just kind of lagging behind. And it'd be interesting to know what she was thinking about. I was wondering if she's thinking about all her life, and how it was such a mistake to follow these crazy in-laws everywhere, and how all their life is leading down to this. And if those men just wouldn't have come, their life would still be happy, instead of running around all night and being all fearful, and all those wasted years that they lived all in the desert. And was she angry? Was she scared? Was she just curious? I don't know. Probably more angry than anything, but I don't know. But either way, when the explosion came, her heart's still back there, remember? The explosion came, she had to turn around and see what was back there, because that's where the dreams are. That's where her heart is. Her attachment to Sodom and her disobedience cost her her life. Is there something that I'm attached to that's costing me my life? It's probably not Sodom, but is there something that I am holding on to that is costing me my life? Is there something that if I feel God calling me to something, that I have to turn around and go back and hold on to something and take it with me? Is there something in my life that's that way? Is there something that I'm attached to that prevents me from serving Christ? Jesus said, "He that is," in my own words, "not willing to forsake all and follow me cannot be my disciple." Well, Mrs. Lot couldn't go into that, or couldn't live either, because she was still holding on to Sodom back here. So Mrs. Lot lost her life basically because of her attachment to Sodom. Because of her attachment to her own wants, she reinterpreted the command. She reinterpreted what was asked of her. And because of that, she disobeyed. If you would have asked her if she disobeyed, she'd probably say no, because in her mind she reinterprets what's being asked of her. And Mr. Lot had a sad end himself. He lost his children. He lost his wife. He lost his wealth. He traded his house, his office, and his farm for a cave in the mountains. He ended up going to the mountains after all because he figured out that this little town of Zoar was one of the 4 cities in that area. And these people from Sodom ending up being the only survivors, how did they know? You can't live in our town, we're going to kill you, that kind of thing. He decided that it's better to live in the mountains after all. So here's Lot, after his cushy life in Sodom, living in this damp cave up there, like a terrorist. And he lost it, lost everything because of his life's choices. He found out too late that life's choices have consequences. And I guess today, what I'd like to leave with us here, all of us are in the present. We are all right here in the present, and all of us have the freedom of choice. All of us do. And if we don't intentionally make choices and intentionally serve God and intentionally think about life, where we're at, then we're going to make unintentional choices which are going to be made based on where we're at and based on fairly flimsy reasons probably, and some reasons that we don't even like to think about. And we just gradually will slide into places that we would rather not go if we would take the time to think about it. And it may not even be that big of a thing, but little things over time add up. And we can find ourselves, like Lot, just totally broken at the end of our life because of not being intentional about our choices. We can end up, that long gradual slide is a reaction, or is a product of making involuntary choices. So I'd like to just leave that challenge with us to let's make these intentional choices. Abraham made some of these more intentional choices, and his outcome was different. Maybe sometime we can preach on Abraham there. I'm sorry, I didn't realize it was so long here, but God bless you all, and I'll turn the time over to the song leader.
Church hymn number 383. Just thinking about Lot's journey, Abraham's journey, and where all they went. And the song here is "He Leadeth Me." I being in the way, the Lord led me. Today we have the Lord to lead us as we go through life. I think it's a good thing. 383. Till
Mr. and Mrs. Lot. Anyone have a word of testimony on the message this morning?
Read a lot of learn from the title and also the story of Lot and his wife, Abraham, decisions that have consequences. We're living in a time when I think it was brought out that living in a time of opportunity to make decisions, but weighing those decisions in the light of eternity and whether we're going to be where we want to be when we get to the end of the decision that we've made. Appreciate the message.
Very good.
Challenge for me. This world can be like Sodom, and I think that the lesson of, or the story of how Sodom was destroyed is maybe a picture of God's judgment on this world. This world's getting more like Sodom all the time, in more ways than one. And when the Lord returns, am I going to behold his face and be anxious to leave, or am I going to look back? It's where we have our affections.
That's right. I was challenged by that as well. When the Son of Man cometh, will he find what on earth? Faith. Yes. It's real. It's real. Somebody have something to say? I was convicted on this idea of Lot being a righteous man and living life in this city in a prestigious position. Kind of in the world, but not in the world.
In the world, but not of it.
Yeah. How caught up do we get living life in the world? How much time do I spend keeping up with current events? Analyzing investments, analyzing or being discouraged about losses. I don't know. Thank you, brother, for sharing this with me, Jason. I was convicted. I ask you to pray for me as he hit some pretty key